it seems to me that you're on a very fruitful path in talking about this. While you were speaking, I was thinking how this shows up in a lot of fields. So even, for example, in great literature. And the example that came to my mind is Jorge Luis Borges. Have you read any of Jorge Luis Borges' short stories? Okay. So it seems to me that this man's writing is itself guided by a fundamental question. And maybe this is true of other great authors. In fact, I would be willing to give you some other examples. Borges' question is this: what are the effects of infinity on human beings? Right? Because we have stories like Funes the Memorious. The guy falls, hits his head, and not only cannot forget anything, and not just from that point, I mean, he actually remembers everything, but his experience is as vivid, his memories are as vivid as the moment of experience itself. And so he's completely overwhelmed, and he just lies in the bed. He lies in the dark. And then we have, for example, The Immortal. And it's about a guy who is in North Africa in fighting, this is his earliest memory anyway, and fighting in North Africa in a Roman legion, and accidentally drinks the water of life, the water of immortality. And then after centuries and centuries, he seeks death. And he reasons that there must be an antidote, right? If there's a place where you can drink water, it makes you immortal. There's got to be some other spring or something that you can drink and allow you to die. But the problem is that his life just blends together. He can't separate anything out because...
So is Borges looking for the advantages to finitude, let's say?
Yes, exactly. Well, let me put it a different way. What he is suggesting is that we are creatures of finitude. We are creatures of finitude in terms of our lifespan. We are creatures of finitude in terms of our intelligence, our memory. We are creatures of finitude in terms of our capacity to understand. So, for example, there's another wonderful story. It's about a Mayan priest during the time of the conquistadors, and they destroy the civilization. They throw him in a underground prison, and there are some bars, and on the other side is a jaguar. And he begins to recall that there's an ancient myth that the gods have inscribed in the world somehow a phrase that gives you complete omnipotence, if you could utter the phrase. Anyway, and one day he's watching the jaguar and he realizes that its spots spell out somehow this phrase, which he then utters. And then he's looking for a way to destroy the conquistadors and restore Mayan civilization. But now he sees everything, this great wheel, the entire universe. He understands everything. And he has no longer any interest in doing anything because that knowledge simply,
it's complete.
It's complete, and it's totally irrelevant what's happening here on Earth or anything like that. My favorite is the Library of Babel, which is about the universe is a library, and the library has, hexagonal cells, and every cell has X number of shelves, and every shelf has X number of books of exactly the same length, written in 23 characters or 24, whatever it is, a certain number of letters, comma, period, space. And it's inhabited by librarians, and they're looking through these books, and they're trying to find some meaning. But
it's an infinite library.
It's an infinite library. And by the way, the mathematicians have done the calculations on this.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, and like the most coherent phrase in any book that this librarian who's narrating it knows, and he's gone all as far as he can, is something like, "O time thy pyramids," right? So everyone starts looking for books because they realize there's, I want to find something that will explain the meaning of my life or my purpose or something. And then the fundamental proposition of the library is formulated, which is that any book that is possible is actual in the library.
Right.
In other words, they can use like 1 million characters or something. So any combination of characters exists. That means that there is a book in this library that describes exactly this event. We're sitting here having this podcast. This is a possible book. It must exist in this library. Now, but there are also weird mathematical problems because if you think about it, it can't be the case that any possible book is actual because you can have catalogs of catalogs of catalogs so that it like mathematically it explodes. But anyway, so my point is, what happens in a universe where finite beings, finite rational intellects, try to find some meaning and encounter or are afflicted by infinity in some way. So just to go back here, that's Borges's idea.
Well, it's a fundamental problem, right?
Right.
Because obviously we have some relationship with the infinite.
Yes.
Right. It might be a relationship of negation.
Right,
I mean,
right.
but there's no escape from the conundrum that we're finite
right.
and faced with
Right.
and faced with the infinite.
Indeed. But the point I really wanted to emphasize in what you were saying is this question becomes a fertile soil for these literary growths. In other words, this is the question that animates his being as a writer, and it's highly, highly productive. So we all know that questions are highly productive.
And limitations, you see that in the creativity literature.
Exactly.
So there's a great, extremely comical example of that online. So haiku is a poetic form that has ridiculous limitations.
Yes, right.
And you might say, well, why bother with it? And the answer is, well, you can't play a game without rules.
Yes.
That's the answer.
Yes.
Okay. Now, but there's a spam haiku archive online. So it's only haiku that's only devoted to the luncheon meat. And there's like the last time I looked at it's very funny. They're very funny.
That's pretty
And it's ridiculous. The MIT engineers made the archive, of course. And so there's 50,000 haikus there about spam. But then it's ridiculous and it's supposed to be, and it's comical. But the point is that without that absolutely preposterous set of limitations, that whole universe of poetic beauty, you might say, and comic endeavor wouldn't have come into being. And so it's a very strange thing that there is a genuine relationship between finitude and abundance.
Yes.
Right? So there's a right balance between constraint and possibility that produces abundance. Too much possibility, there's nothing. That's Borges' point.
Yeah.
And then too much limitation, there's nothing, but there's some optimal balance. And maybe, it seems reasonable to propose that the fundamental issue in human life is how to get that balance exactly right. That's really what the ancient Jews were wrestling with when they were trying to figure out how you have a relationship with God. Modern people say, well, there's no such thing as God as well. Do you have a relationship with the infinite or not? You have some relationship. Maybe it could be a productive one if you could formulate it properly.
Yes.